As the Pacific War raged on, the skies over the Ryukyu Islands became a battleground of fire and fury. American bombers, relentless in their mission, swept down the island chain, striking key targets with devastating force. From Amami to Okinawa, the once tranquil islands trembled under the roar of warplanes and the thunder of explosions. But what led to this relentless assault? And how did it shape the course of history? With the Pacific War reaching a critical phase, American military strategists turned their attention to the Ryukyu Islands, a chain of vital stepping stones leading to the Japanese mainland. The islands, once isolated and largely untouched by modern conflict, now found themselves at the center of a relentless aerial assault. American bombers, guided by intelligence reports and strategic objectives, took to the skies with one goal in mind: to dismantle Japan's defenses piece by piece. The first wave of aircraft thundered across the horizon, their engines roaring like an approaching storm. At high altitudes, formations of B-29 superfortresses cruised toward their targets, each carrying a deadly payload designed to cripple enemy infrastructure. Below, fighter escorts weaved through the sky, scanning for any sign of resistance. Japanese anti-aircraft crews, stationed along the coastlines and near military outposts, scrambled into action as alarms blared across the islands. They knew what was coming, but stopping it was another matter entirely. Explosions erupted across Amami, the first of many islands to face the American onslaught. Airstrips, supply depots, and communication hubs were among the primary targets, each strike sending plumes of smoke into the air. The once quiet island, dotted with fishing villages and dense forests, now echoed with the sounds of war. Soldiers rushed to man defensive positions, but their weapons were no match for the overwhelming firepower unleashed from above. As the formation moved southward, Minami felt the impact of heavy bombardment. This remote island, though small in size, played a role in Japan's defensive network. Radar installations and observation posts were key assets, allowing the Imperial forces to monitor American movements across the Pacific. The bombers released their payloads with precision, turning these crucial sites into burning wreckage. Fire spread rapidly, consuming anything in their path. The air was thick with smoke, and the once clear skies darkened under the weight of destruction. On Kume Island, Japanese forces braced for impact as the bombers approached. The island's strategic position made it a valuable target, and American commanders were determined to leave no stronghold intact. Wave after wave of aircraft swept in, unleashing a torrent of explosives that shattered buildings, tore through bunkers, and sent debris flying in all directions. Survivors scrambled for cover, but safety was hard to find in a place where destruction rained from above. Those caught in the open had little chance as fire and steel consumed the landscape. Tokuno, another link in the Ryukyu chain, suffered a similar fate. Bombers targeted ammunition depots and fuel reserves, knowing that without supplies, Japan's ability to resist would weaken. Secondary explosions erupted as stored munitions ignited, sending shock waves through the ground. The intensity of the attack left little standing. Smoke billowed into the sky, marking the island as yet another casualty of the American offensive. On Okino, defensive positions were already battered by the time the bombers arrived. Japanese troops, weary from previous raids, struggled to regroup. The relentless attacks left little opportunity for recovery. Craters littered the landscape, roads were torn apart, and structures lay in ruins. Yet, even as the situation grew desperate, orders were clear: resist at all costs. The soldiers clung to their remaining weapons, but the reality was undeniable. They were facing an enemy with overwhelming strength, and there was no stopping the tide that was coming for them. Finally, the focus shifted to Okinawa, the largest and most heavily fortified island in the chain. The air raid here was different. It was not just about softening defenses. It was about preparing the way for an invasion that would define the final stage of the war. Bombs rained down on fortifications, airfields, and troop concentrations. The Japanese defenders knew what was coming. They had seen what had happened to the other islands, and they understood that Okinawa was the ultimate prize in this campaign. As the last of the bombers turned back toward their bases, the devastation they left behind was undeniable. The Ryukyu Islands had been transformed into a shattered battlefield, their landscapes scarred by craters and wreckage. Fire still burned, smoke still rose, and the echoes of explosions lingered in the air. For the people who lived through the attack, the war was no longer a distant conflict. It was now a brutal reality, one that had arrived on their doorstep with unrelenting force. Though the aerial offensive had achieved its purpose, the battle was far from over. The American forces had cleared a path, but the real fight was yet to come. The invasion of Okinawa loomed on the horizon, promising a clash that would be among the bloodiest of the entire war. The bombardment had left the island scarred, their landscapes transformed by fire and destruction. Smoke still clung to the air as the echoes of the assault faded, but the battle was far from over. The relentless air raids had weakened defenses, but the Japanese forces remained determined to resist. With Okinawa now in sight, American forces shifted their strategy, preparing for an invasion that would push the war into one of its most brutal phases. In the days following the air assault, reconnaissance flights swept over the battered islands, assessing the extent of the damage. What they saw confirmed the success of the campaign: crippled airfields, burning supply depots, and shattered fortifications. Yet, despite the devastation, pockets of resistance remained. Survivors among the Japanese forces regrouped, determined to fight to the last man. Their orders were clear: defend every inch of territory, no matter the cost. As preparations for the land invasion intensified, American warships moved into position, their massive guns trained on strategic points across the islands. Naval artillery unleashed a new wave of destruction, hammering defenses that had already been weakened by the bombings. Explosions erupted along the coastlines, sending plumes of debris skyward as bunkers and gun emplacements crumbled under the relentless barrage. The ground shook with every impact, and entire sections of the landscape were reshaped by the sheer force of the shelling. Amid the destruction, Japanese troops braced for the inevitable. Trenches were reinforced, machine gun nests concealed, and tunnels expanded to provide shelter from the relentless bombardment. They knew what was coming: an invasion unlike anything they had faced before. The Americans were bringing overwhelming force, determined to crush any opposition in their path. The defenders had little hope of victory, but surrender was not an option. As the invasion force approached, tension gripped the battered islands. Landing craft lined the horizon, packed with thousands of soldiers who had trained for this moment. Their mission was clear: secure the islands and eliminate all resistance. The beaches, once quiet stretches of sand, were about to become the setting for a brutal confrontation. When the first wave of landing craft hit the shore, the battle erupted with ferocious intensity. Gunfire crackled across the beaches as Japanese defenders opened fire, determined to hold their ground. Mortars and artillery pounded the advancing troops, churning the sand into a deadly storm of smoke and shrapnel. Soldiers scrambled for cover, pressing forward under the weight of enemy fire. Explosions sent plumes of sand and debris into the air, and the screams of the wounded mixed with the deafening roar of battle. Despite the resistance, the American forces pushed inland. Flamethrowers cleared out hidden bunkers, grenades silenced enemy positions, and tanks rumbled forward, crushing obstacles in their path. The defenders fought with desperation, launching counterattacks wherever possible. Snipers picked off advancing troops from concealed positions, and hidden explosives turned pathways into death traps. Every inch of ground was contested, every advance met with fierce opposition. The battle raged on, stretching into days of brutal combat. Villages became war zones, their streets filled with the wreckage of war. Civilians caught in the chaos had nowhere to run, forced to endure the horror unfolding around them. Homes were reduced to rubble, fields turned into battlegrounds, and the once tranquil islands bore the full weight of war. American commanders, determined to break enemy resistance, called in air support to suppress the most heavily defended positions. Fighter planes strafed enemy strongholds, their machine guns ripping through defenses. Bombers delivered precision strikes on key targets, ensuring that the Japanese forces had no safe refuge. The relentless attacks wore down the defenders, but their determination never wavered. As the fighting dragged on, supplies ran low, and exhaustion set in. The Japanese forces, cut off from reinforcements, faced an impossible situation. Still, they refused to surrender. Some launched desperate banzai charges, rushing headlong into enemy lines with nothing but bayonets and sheer willpower. Others retreated into fortified caves, turning natural formations into final strongholds. American troops were forced to root them out one by one, clearing each position with explosives and relentless assaults. The cost of victory was staggering. Thousands of lives were lost on both sides, and the landscape bore the scars of the fierce struggle. When the last pockets of resistance were finally silenced, the battle was over, but the cost of war was undeniable. The Ryukyu Islands had been secured, but at a tremendous price. For the survivors, the echoes of war would never fade. The devastation left behind served as a haunting reminder of the relentless march toward Okinawa, where an even greater battle awaited. The war was far from over, and the road ahead promised more destruction, more sacrifice, and a final reckoning that would determine the fate of the Pacific.